Dr. Jasser, thank you for being with us. How are you today?
Great. It's nice to be with you. Thanks for having me.
I want to listen with you to some sound from the Prime Minister, Cameron, and then talk about it, about Sharia law.
Under the doctrine of state multiculturalism, we've encouraged different cultures to live separate lives apart from each other and apart from the mainstream. We failed to provide a vision of society to which they feel they want to belong. We've even tolerated these segregated communities behaving in ways that run completely counter to our values.
Seems to be around the world a lot of interest in moving toward Sharia law. What should we know about that?
I can't tell you how important this issue is, because at the end of the day, when we look at radicalization, when we look at the threat of terrorism on our soil in the West, and as we see some of the changes in the Middle East, we have to see, well, what are these movements? And the main movement I've described as political Islam. Our organization, we founded after 9/11 because we feel terrorism is just a symptom of an underlying ideology. That ideology is political Islam, whose instrument is Sharia law. They want to put into place Sharia law in states and create the Islamic State, basically a theocracy based in clerics determining what is and what is not law. It is a supremacist system, very different than Western democracy. Islamic states could use democracy as an engine to come into power through elections, but at the end of the day, that's not democracy. It's an oligarchy where clerics determine law. So Sharia, to them, they call it God's law, but it's actually man-made law, interpretation of God's law to control society through a theocratic mechanism. And as Prime Minister Cameron was talking about, it's very important to note that some segments, and this is a minority, but some significant minority segments in the West, Islamists, have been using democracy and freedom in the West to create a separatist legal system that creates incubators for an ideology, a supremacist ideology that use court systems, etc., to enact Sharia law under our aegis of the protection of our systems.
And it's interesting because people have strong opinions, as you said, and I hope that on our live chat people will tell us what they think. But we're not just talking about in other countries around the world, we're talking about here too. Here's a survey, a poll. American Muslims ultimately want to establish Sharia or Islamic law as law of the land in the U.S. And 8% completely agreed with that statement. If we could put it up, 15% mostly agree, 28% mostly disagree, 37% completely disagree, 13% weren't even sure how they felt about it. Is this really a possibility?
Well, you know, one of the important part of this statistic is, you know, Muslims are only at 1.5% in America. In Europe, it's more of a problem because their percentages are higher. But what's happening is under the aegis of the arbitration system, for example, in England, you've got 83, 84 functional Sharia courts that are not called Sharia courts, but basically they're arbitration courts that become quasi-Sharia courts because the normal British system doesn't have any oversight. And we're seeing in America some examples of arbitration systems that have basically been funneling systems for Muslims to separate from the legal system and create Sharia-type systems that allows them to incubate a separatist ideology. Now, we're seeing around the country movements to try to make this illegal, and I would say rather than target Sharia, which can mean many different things to Muslims, you know, for example, I practice Sharia in my personal life. I think we should target the arbitration systems and say they should never conflict with the state constitutions and federal constitution, and there should be more oversight to make sure that women's rights are maintained, all human rights are maintained, etc.
All right, speaking of human rights, you know, opinions run very strong on this, and some of it may be there's a lack of knowledge out there, one of the reasons why you're here. Some may be that people just feel the way they feel, and Just Fed Up is the name of the person on the chat saying Islam is dominance by violence with religion as a front. All of our rights are being taken away one by one. Should Sharia law be accepted in the United States? Oh, vote in our poll. This is us. We want you to vote. This is the American people. Our founding fathers are rolling over. And there are big differences in the law to help people understand how so they can decide how they feel. We have another full screen that explains the differences between our laws and Sharia law and how they conflict. Can you see this, Doctor? You're familiar with it. Can you explain it to us?
Well, you know, I think it's really important that, you know, this discussion, I can't emphasize how important it is, but we have to be careful that if we're going to solve the threat of the doctrine that uses Sharia, only Muslims can do that. So we have to be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and that we Muslims have to come to terms with modernity. We formed our organization to separate mosque and state because our families came to this country because a nation based in an establishment clause was exactly what we wanted. Now, has authoritative Islam reformed? It has not. It needs to reform, it needs to modernize, it needs to separate mosque and state, separate personal Sharia, and eliminate governmental Sharia and say that we're based in one law.
Okay.
That can happen. There's a lot of Islamic scholars that believe that.
Yeah. What's going to change? You're still going to pray 5 times a day, right? That's not going to change. Harsh punishments for lawbreakers. I'm sure that's something that you're supporting. Wine drinking? Okay, banks cannot collect interest. I'm not familiar with that one. And unlawful sexual intercourse. Define that.
Well, listen, all of those things are part of Sharia that I would disagree with. I don't think the government should be involved in determining whether people drink alcohol, these laws against apostasy, these laws against blasphemy. All of that needs to be, Muslims need to start speaking up and saying that is not our faith. That is a part of Sharia law, absolutely, but that needs to be reformed, and Muslims need to stand up and say those are theocrats, thugs, oppressors that are using the name of Sharia law to say that that is our religion. And that has been, you know, America was formed in separating from the Church of England and canon law, and Muslims, I think, can similarly go through that same reform, that same evolution. And I, as a Muslim,
will you still be Muslims if you start drinking and doing some of these other things? I mean, there are parts of this, Ellen, correct me, that are what differentiate being a Muslim from any other religion.
Well, look, Orthodox Jews have a very different view. I have 2 questions. Number one is, how is this different than tribal law in Alaska that allows tribes to impose their own laws on people against the American law? Sometimes they put kids out on an island and stuff that we would never do. And number 2, we use Sharia to our advantage in Pakistan when we just paid off, which we supposedly didn't do, somebody to get under blood law a CIA agent, contractor, who supposedly murdered 2 people.
Well, listen, I believe in personal choice. I choose not to drink. That's a way that I demonstrate my faith. Faith is no longer faith if the government coerces you. So you can have a liberty-minded consciousness and believe in your own personal practice of your own God's law, but the government should have nothing to do with that, and that is what America is all about. So we mix theocratic impositions into law with saying this is Sharia law. So we have to allow Muslims to go through that separation of mosque and state. Now, as far as tribalism, you're exactly right. This process of reform needs education. It needs the beginning of the installation to Muslim consciousness that the individual takes preeminence over the tribe. We have your right. In many instances in Pakistan and Jordan, we've seen laws that have condoned honor killing, that have given lesser punishments for these things in the name of Sharia. We've seen murders in Pakistan of judges that have tried to stand against blasphemy laws, but yet the tribes have killed them because they have used Sharia to oppress their populations. And I'll tell you, the greatest asset we've had in reform are women's movements in Saudi Arabia, in Pakistan, in India, where they say, you know what, we're going to reinterpret this and not allow our brothers, our fathers, our husbands to determine for us what is and what is not religion. So the key is getting government and theocrats out of determining Sharia and making it a personal choice that nobody can interfere in.
Dr. Jasser, thank you very much for being with us today. Nice to meet you.
Thank you for having me.